Welcome back to the channel. So last time we finally got back on track and finished up this point system. Got this points arm mounted on here, and then we got this bracket made with the rest of the point system that'll eventually mount onto here. But the next thing we're going to do is work on the catch lever, or cutout arm as it's called in the plans. Okay, so the cutout arm is going to mount on this bracket that we made earlier, and it's going to swing over here, and then the one side of it will catch on this piece of metal that we put behind the bracket here, and then that is what actually holds the exhaust valve open during the miss cycle of the hit and miss. So it will latch in there and hold the rocker arm, hold the valve open, so the engine is coasting, and once it coasts down to a certain speed, then that lever will release and close it, and then it'll fire again. So the other end of the arm will hook back to here to a spool valve that we'll make later. So that valve has got a groove in it that the other end of the arm rides on, and then that is actually attached to the flyweights. So as the flyweights move in and out, that moves the spool valve, and then that spool valve moves the arm, which pivots on this point right here, and then that latches and unlatches the push rod here, which holds the exhaust valve open. So that's the governor system of the hit and miss. So to make this arm, it is 2 pieces of steel and then another piece of steel and a round piece in the center, and that gets silver soldered, so it's actually 3 pieces. And then there's an adjustment knob here, and this is 1/8 of an inch, so I've got some close to 1/8 inch. It's a little bit thick. We'll have to machine it down and smooth it out. So I've got a piece of metal that we'll start with here, and we'll get these 2 sections cut out and machined out here, and then we'll turn this round section here and drill it and tap it, and then we'll also make this knob, and then we'll get this silver solder together, and then it gets another hole in here. This is the pivot arm, the pivot hole that goes on this arm here. So we'll get this set up and get it laid out first and start machining on it. Okay, so that finished up the governor catch arm. So I laid this whole piece out before I milled this out, so it's easier that way, I think, to get all the dimensions, and then cut this out. Bandsaw, I drilled a hole here to get this radius and drilled a hole here to get this radius. Cut it out with the bandsaw, did some milling on it to the dimension, and then kind of cleaned it up on the die filer. And then once it was done, I set it up in the mill, and then this is a 1/4 inch piece of round that gets soldered in here. So I just took an end mill and plunged down through it with a 1/4 inch end mill, so that left a rounded section here. So that would fit good to this round section here to solder that in. Then made this round section here, that's just a 1/4 inch piece that's drilled, and then counterboard for a spring. There's a spring that goes in here that hits against here, and then tapped 540, and then I made this little brass knob. It got turned down, I knurled it, then turned it down, threaded it, then it gets turned down to a tip on the end that holds the spring, and then went ahead and soldered these two pieces to the 1/4 inch round piece here. And then I'll show you how all of this here goes together. So the knob goes in there, and I've got a spring, but it's a little bit long, and I want to kind of get everything else set with the spool valve and the governor, just to give me an idea of how long the spring needs to be. It says to use a spring out of a tire valve, which I took one out of a tire valve, but it was pretty short. I don't know, I didn't particularly like it, so I found another spring. And then I made up this pin here, turned this down, drilled it for the cotter key, kind of rounded it off on the top there just to hold everything together. So this will go into here, and then once we get the cam gear and the cam lobe in there, that'll sort of set it, but I think it'll end up pretty close to being flush with the back side here. And then we'll just snug that up a little bit there. So there'll be a spool valve, which will probably be the next piece we'll make in the next episode, that rides on this shaft here, and there'll be a groove in there that the end of this lever sets into, and then as that moves back and forth, which is attached to the governor, that's what moves this arm back and forth. So the cam lobe here will open up our push rod, and then if the weights are pulling in and pulling that spool valve out, it'll actually catch this lever here. I don't have it up high enough. Let's move it just a little bit. We'll have to set this final angle once we get everything together. So it'll open this up, and then it'll catch there on that little piece of metal that we made earlier. And then that will actually hold the exhaust valve open. So that is the miss cycle of the hit and miss. So that's what holds the valve open. And then as it slows down, these weights will pull in, which will move this spool valve, and then that will kick this lever. And then your cam lobe is just always slightly bumping this just a little bit. So there'll be just a little bit of a bump on it, like that, as the cam is coming around. So then when it's open just a little bit and this spool valve moves in, then that allows the push rod to come all the way back, and then that will fire again and speed the engine up, and then that'll open this up enough to where it'll catch again. So that's how that lever works, back and forth. See, we open that up, and then that lets the push rod go back. So that's going to do it for this episode. Like I say, the next time we'll get this spool valve knocked out that slides onto here, and then we'll probably start on the governor. There's some arms that come down that go into another slot on the spool valve here, and then that comes out to the weights and the springs that attach to the flywheel to make the rest of the governor system. We'll get started on that next time. Thanks for watching.